And welcome back, everybody, to our third session of today's Sustainability Summit hosted by DSpace. Our next presenter is Jerrod Bly, the Sustainability Manager at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So we've had the zoo, we've had schools, now we've got the Med Center. Jerrod is the Sustainability Manager at UNMC, a role he has held since November of 2021. He leads sustainability efforts focused on aligning climate action with the Med Center's mission to create a healthier future for all. Jerrod, welcome and take it away.
All right, thank you, Michael. Just a couple quick housekeeping issues. I have been dealing with a cold for the last week or two. So if I sound a little nasally or my voice is a little broken, that's why. If I do have a coughing fit, I'm going to take myself off audio and get a sip of water and come back. So it's happened a few times. But I'll try to get through and power through. I do have quite a bit of material to get through, so I might work at a pretty good clip as we get through this. But as Michael said, my name is Jerrod Bly. I serve as the sustainability manager at the Med Center. Been there for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was working with a nonprofit organization up in upstate New York on economic development and trying to deploy clean energy programs. Prior to that, I was at Montana State University working under the Department of Energy's Weatherization Assistance Program, mainly in the built environment and trying to connect those resources with low to moderate income households. So a lot of my focus has been on the technical aspects of the built environment and particularly solar PV and solar thermal applications and design. So here are our learning objectives for today. And also just a quick disclaimer that the viewpoints I shared today are my own and do not necessarily represent the viewpoints of UNMC or Nebraska Medicine. Okay, learning objectives is to understand the role that the Med Center plays in climate leadership, both at the local level and national and global level, because we do have influence throughout all those tiers. Awareness of our institutional sustainability goals and to identify some of the key strategies that we use on campus to be more sustainable. I'm going to start with some fast facts or stats about the Med Center. So UNMC has about 4,700 students this year with current enrollment for fall of 24. This is the 24th year in a row where we've actually increased enrollment and broke a record. And this year, we increased by 3%. We have roughly 6,500 employees at through UNMC as of this year, and around 270 million in research expenditures or grants, and an economic impact of nearly 6 billion. The clinical side, Nebraska Medicine side, has also been around for a very long time. It has 9,600 employees. We have over 800 licensed beds between our Omaha and Bellevue Medical Center campus, and we're ranked the #1 hospital in Nebraska for the 13th year in a row. So continuing on with some of these stats, I want to just dive into what the healthcare sector contributes insofar as we're talking about climate change and the climate crisis or challenge. So the next two slides, I'm going to go over some statistics that might be surprising to folks, but I always like to, start off with these to kind of lay the groundwork so folks understand how the healthcare sector actually contributes to this problem. So the first is that just acknowledging that the healthcare sector does contribute to the climate crisis, kind of full stop, period. The energy that we use, the products that we use and dispose of, all in their own way contribute to the issue. Healthcare's climate footprint is equivalent to about 4.5% of global net emissions. And in the US, you'll see that number kind of fluctuate somewhere between 8.5% and 10% for the US global emissions. The global healthcare climate footprint is equivalent to about 514 coal-fired power plants. So that really puts things into perspective. You think about the amount of emissions that come out of one coal-fired power plant, multiply that by 500. plus, you start to get a sense of what we're actually contributing to the to net emissions globally. The health sector, if it were a country, would be the fifth largest emitter on the planet. And the way we contribute to GHG emissions and climate pollution is through our energy consumption, transport, the production and manufacturing of products, the use of those products, and the disposal. So, emissions directly from our health facilities that we own. So, you may have heard folks talk about scopes of emissions. So, here I'm talking about scope one, makes up roughly 17%. Our indirect emissions, so the emissions that come from the purchase of energy like electricity or maybe steam at some facilities, that's what we call scope two. It accounts for about 12%. And by and large, the lion's share of our emissions come from scope three. And I've seen this statistic fall somewhere between 70 and 80%. And scope three is our supply chain. So the things that we buy and consume. So think about pharmaceuticals, medical devices, hospital equipment, instruments, even the infrastructure, like what goes into our buildings and the built environment, all contribute to this as well. You may or may not have seen this graphic before, but I think it does a really fine job of illustrating kind of the connection between climate change and human health. You know, as a healthcare facility, it's an imperative on us to make sure that we understand this and we're doing all that we can to, reduce our contribution to the problem. So if you start with this inner ring, you can see some of the climate impacts. So more extreme weather, rising sea level, increased CO2 levels, rising temperature. And as you work your way out on these concentric rings and out toward the outside perimeter of the graphic here, you can see, how that translates into different issues, whether it's asthma and cardiovascular disease, respiratory allergies and asthma, forced migration, civil conflict. You can see how climate change impacts human health. This is another graphic that you may or may not have seen, or a concept that you may or may not be familiar with. So it's called social determinants of health. You may also hear it referred to as social drivers of health. And there are several different dimensions in here, which are essentially the idea or the concept is that there are external forces at play on climates and individual or on communities and individuals that contribute to their health outcomes, right? And as a sector that is contributing to climate change and the climate challenge, it's upon us to also do all that we can to not contribute to it, right? So in my role, because I'm housed within facilities, the most salient example is the built environment. Because of what I do in my role and how I work with our planning teams and our project managers when we construct projects or infrastructure projects, whether it's buildings or whatnot, we have a duty to make sure that we're doing those in the most sustainable way as possible, right? So thinking about energy efficiency, or clean energy, or water reduction measures, things like that, to not contribute to this built environment dimension within the social drivers of health. And there are certain objectives within the built environment that we can really focus on. And one way is, as you can see in the graphic here, to focus on improving health and safety in places where people live, work, learn, and play. And those, those are what our community on campus is doing. We have people not necessarily live there, but they work and they learn there, right? As a research facility, as an academic facility, as a patient care facility, we have people coming in and out. And we need to do our part to make sure that we're not contributing more to this problem. So We want to reduce the health environmental risks from hazardous sites. That's one example. Reduce the number of days people are exposed to unhealthy air. So, again, thinking about emissions and air quality are lenses that we look through when we're designing projects and constructing those projects. We want to increase the proportion of adults who walk or bike to get to places. So, how that translates into some of the stuff we're doing right now is our transportation goal, which I'll get to here in a little bit, and how we want to think about our connectivity to the Omaha metro area and how we can get people to and from campus in a low carbon way, and also promote active transportation. And we're trying to increase trips made by mass transit. So again, that kind of falls under our transportation goal that we have on campus, and what we're doing to promote and make it easier for our colleagues and staff and students to get to and from campus in a low carbon way. So that section was really kind of laying the groundwork, the foundation of how we think, how I think through the program, and how it's informed our sustainability mission. So I like to start a lot of my presentations with this particular slide and just read through what the mission is. So for us, it's protecting human and environmental health and using resources wisely to provide for the future while meeting current needs. That's a pretty standard sustainability statement, but it has a lot of meaning and it holds a lot of weight because we are charged with being good stewards of the resources that we have at our disposal. And we do use a lot of resources. And so we need to make sure that we're doing it in an intelligent and responsible way. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit here, the next section is going to go over our sustainability journey. I kind of want to provide an arc of where our sustainability program has come from, what we've done, and where we're at currently. And the pieces that I pulled out of our timeline tool to put on the slides is really just scratching the surface. We've done so much over the years. This is really just a highlight reel that demonstrates both breadth and depth of the programming that we've done on campus and all the different things that we have accomplished and are still working on. So starting from the beginning in 2008 is really when sustainability officially began at the Med Center. There was an initiative really to retire these printed green directories and move to an online version of it. And so there was a group of folks who were really adamant about this, led that initiative, that effort, and made it happen. And that was really where we kind of consider our modern sustainability programming starting. There had been recycling efforts like in the 80s and 90s, but it wasn't necessarily formalized. So in 2018, that's kind of the starting point for us. There were things that happened between 2008 and 2012, but in 2012, we had our first Earth Week, and we still celebrate Earth Week, and now it's expanded to Earth Month. And we have a whole suite of activities and opportunities for people to get engaged and to do something on campus that's sustainability related, whether it's a litter cleanup, or kind of our flagship program is our personal electronic waste recycling. That's a 2-day event, or a tree planting. There's several opportunities for the campus community to get involved, and we're always looking for ways to improve that as well. Moving forward a little bit, in 2014, we had the two different, I would say, volunteer groups that were operating kind of independently between UNMC and Nebraska Medicine come together and basically got rebranded as Live Green. One of the teams was really focused on energy efficiency. The other was really focused on recycling and waste management. And we brought them together in a formal program and network. And it was a big success. We had about 150 individuals who were in that volunteer network. And we still hover right around that, somewhere between 160 and 170. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about how this particular program has also evolved over time as well, a little bit later in the presentation. So 2014, um, we had a sustainability master plan that was developed and approved on campus. And that was really the beginning of kind of our strategic thinking of how to integrate sustainability programming efforts and initiatives on campus. And a lot of that was laid out in that plan, which was rather large, but was a really good guiding document as to where we were going to go as a program. In 2015, the Travel Smart program was launched. Some of you may have heard of this before. It's gotten regional recognition through MAPA as a great program, a successful program. Essentially, the idea here was that we provided opportunities and resources for our colleagues, students, and staff to travel to and from campus in a way other than that single occupancy vehicle model. So leveraging public transit, leveraging the bike and pedestrian trails that go through the city, carpooling, and it's even evolved into kind of this hybrid work from home model as well. Like we take that into account. Uh, but we had, great success. Over 1,000 people signed up for it right away, and we're still growing. I would say each day we have new people sign up, and it's just been one of those programs that from the very beginning was successful and continues to be successful. In 2016, we had our Executive Sustainability Council form, and I will explain why this is a little bit more important later on in the presentation. But we got, some top tier leadership to come together under a committee or council to help guide where the campus was going when it comes to sustainability and what they wanted to see as far as goal setting and accountability going forward. So in that master plan, there were some preliminary or initial goals that were set over the few years, the intervening years. So from 2014 to 2017, things were reevaluated. And in 2017, our current 2030 goals were established for campus. And I, again, will touch on those and explain what those are later in the presentation. In 2018, we had our first zero waste event on campus. We continue to do those each year. We have our Welcome Back Barbecue as kind of our flagship zero waste event, but we're looking for ways to get that model adopted through other departments and make this more standard across campus. 2019, we had the largest rooftop solar array installed. This was about a 0.5 megawatt, and it's housed on 3 different buildings and continues to generate clean electrons today, and it works, wonderfully. In 2019, we also had the first farmers market come to campus. COVID kind of shut that down, but again, I'm trying to show just the variety of things that we've done on campus over the years when it comes to sustainability. In 2022, the Med Center signed on to the HHS Climate Pledge, and one of the commitments of that pledge was to have a Scope 3 inventory done by the end of 2024. We're coming up on that period. We're on target to get that done. And again, this will come into play a little bit further along in the presentation as to why that's important from a carbon reduction planning perspective. And then in 23, we wrapped up our NET Prairie grants. So we converted roughly 1.5 acres, a little bit more on campus to an urban prairie. And that supports biodiversity and some ecosystem services here in the urban core. And it's been a great project as well. Those were kind of marginal areas before, and we worked with a local consultant and contractor to come up with the seed mix and to maintain those spaces moving forward. And if you go to them in the spring, in the early summer, they're just absolutely amazing, the variety of color and plants that you see there. Okay. So all that to say, the evolution of the sustainability program at the Med Center has led to where we're at currently with our institutional sustainability goals. I think it's worth noting that there's no institution that hasn't evolved over time. This is a journey. And so where you start out doesn't necessarily mean that's where you're going to be 5 years, 10 years down the road. In fact, I hope it's not, because there's so much churning and changing in this space and in the industry that you should be reevaluating your goals that you may have set 10 years ago to make sure they're still relevant and in alignment with the most current science and where the industry is headed. These are the goals that we've had since 2017, as I mentioned. And I'll start from the top and work across and down. So the first is our emissions reduction. This is scope 1 and 2. So think operational carbon, right? The carbon that's coming out of direct burning of fossil fuels on campus, and the emissions from the energy that we purchase, primarily electricity from OPPD, right? We're trying to get net zero, which means 90% deep decarbonization. And we're trying to reduce that by 154,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That's just scope 1 and 2. Remember that. And that counts for roughly 20 to 30% of our overall carbon footprint. I mentioned the transportation goal. The goal there was to have 35% of employee commutes using bikes, public transit, carpooling, working from home. The way we get that score is through our sustainability engagement survey, which we release every other year. We just wrapped up one for 2024. We haven't done the analysis on it, but as of December of 22, we had actually achieved our transportation goal and went above and beyond that 35% and was sitting right around 40%. I hope with the most recent analysis that we're currently working on, we'll see that that's gone even above that 40%. We have a net zero water goal. So the idea there is that we have a natural water budget, which means the amount of precipitation that falls on campus in any given year times the footprint of our campus gives us our natural water budget. And our baseline was about 225 million gallons per year, and we're trying to reduce that by 120 million gallons. And that'll get us at that natural water budget. We have a campus density goal. This primarily is to ensure that we grow up instead of sprawling out. We're in a very dense urban core, and so we want to maintain green space for healing and for productivity so people can have some respite, whether they're patients or employees or students. Like, they can go out, they can sit under a tree, they can enjoy some flowers and some green space to be more productive and help relieve stress and all the other co-benefits that come along with that. We have a waste reduction goal. Again, we're trying to be net zero, so have a diversion rate of 90%. We're currently at 20%, so we still have quite a bit to go. But this is waste that is non-regulated medical waste, right? So things that essentially would go to the landfill, we're trying to divert that through recycling practices and reuse programs and reduction programs. And hopefully in the future, we'll also have a compost program that we pull onto campus as well. Last is our sustainability engagement score. We have the goal to have the score of 85. We're currently at 58. Again, we just finished up our most current sustainability engagement survey cycle, and the goal is to have that score jump up from 58 to 63, so a 5-point increase. And we'll know that within a few weeks after we do that analysis. All right, shifting gears a little bit. Governance, what governance looks like on campus. I mentioned this Executive Sustainability Council when I was going through the journey. This is really, I wouldn't say it's necessarily unique, but it's really important for the work that I do and for campus to have this group of folks who are invested in sustainability work and are accountable to help move the work forward to achieve those goals. Right. So I'm not going to read off everything here from a governance perspective, but that executive sponsorship is really important, and also that cross-functional representation is important. We've kind of handpicked and selected folks from different departments to make sure that we have proper representation to do the work and to have that perspective and that voice at the table to understand what the challenges are and to really help us kind of craft the solutions that we need to get over whatever barrier it is that's in the way to get us toward those larger campus level goals. Um, they are also really helpful and important in strategic decision making, right? So my goal may be to, or my in my role, it's to explore ways in which we can move the program toward those goals. I will present something to the ESC. They will, and I'll present the business case about it, kind of the risks, the benefits, and as a group, they decide whether or not this is the direction that we want to go, right? So that having that framework is really important because we have representation and accountability throughout the process. And last but not least is this resource allocation. Again, you have to have the proper resources at your disposal in order to do the work. If you don't have that, you'll find out very quickly that it's hard to get anything done, right? So they are there to help with that piece, to connect the dots and make sure that the resources are identified and unlocked, to, and essentially to make sure that whatever solution is identified is carried out and executed. This is our current membership. So you can see we have a lot of VP folks, deans, professors, we got students. We try to have representation from all the major departments. We got IT represented there. These folks know the problems, they can help solve them by allocating those resources. And that's really, really important when it comes to an institution of our size and complexity in trying to achieve some very aggressive climate goals. Like you have to have this piece in place. It's really important. So the role and the purpose of the ESC, I mentioned this or alluded to it a little bit earlier, but one of the main things is setting our sustainability goals, right? And helping to communicate those goals as well. I've harped on this resource allocation. Again, I can't underplay that enough. Like that's really important. The policy implementation and coordination is also helpful. These are folks that are kind of in the top tier of leadership, and so they have the ability to help drive policy that supports the work and gets us closer to those goals, and accountability and progress monitoring. So I think about how things cascade down, right? I report essentially to the Executive Sustainability Council. We have certain KPIs that we've established to make sure that the work I'm doing is aligning with the larger campus goals and that we're on target and on track to hit those goals. So I report up to them on a quarterly basis, what progress we've made, what the next quarter of planning looks like, things like that. Okay, pathways. So I've mentioned a few times, right, in the learning objectives, I talked about what the different strategies are at play right now to get us to those goals. And so the next chunk of slides essentially is about the pathways and strategies that we use on campus to advance that work. Some key concepts for a sustainable campus would be mitigation, right? So reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that we emit into the atmosphere is obviously important, right? To slow the effects of climate change. Like we want to bring that down as much as we possibly can, which is why we have a net zero goal for scopes 1 and 2. Adaptation is understanding that the climate is already changing and having that adaptive capacity within the organization to be proactive in the work that we do, right? So we understand that things are changing. The train is already headed down the track, and we need to make sure that we're posturing ourselves um, to be able to absorb those impacts, which kind of plays into resilience, right? Like sometimes you may see these terms used interchangeably, they are distinct and different. Um, but the next would be resilience, right? So it's having the capacity to prepare and respond to any type of climate related impacts or hazardous climatic events. Um, and this next slide really kind of plays into that. So if you recall, this past spring and summer were, I would say that some of the things that we saw were record breaking, right? Like this particular infographic from NOAA shows just the amount of tornado warnings, confirmed tornadoes, severe thunderstorm warnings. Like things just felt different this spring and summer. And a lot of people I talked to would agree with that. Like this is not typical. And so this is what we expect moving forward is to see these changes in the climate for our region. And my job is to think about, okay, if this is happening, how can we prepare our institution to be ready for them and to ensure that we have business continuity so that we're not down, that we can continue our core mission of providing excellent care to the communities that we serve. And so it's important to understand how adaptation resilience come into play and how they complement the mitigation work so that as we move forward into, I'd say, unknown territory, even though we have some climate modeling that shows us and what we can expect, warmer weather, wetter weather, more severe thunderstorms and tornadic activity, things like that. We have to be designing buildings and infrastructure that can withstand those impacts. You may also recall that in July we had the straight line winds. That storm was the largest power outage in Omaha and OPBD history, right? That was a very severe incident and event, and we can expect more of those, especially as a healthcare facility, the largest in the state. Again, we have an obligation to make sure that we're hardening our infrastructure to prepare for this stuff and that we do not go down, that we don't have downtime, that we can continue to serve the public and the populations that are around us and that come to us for care. All right. So I didn't mention this, but we're currently in the midst of drafting a climate action resilience plan. And this does obviously align with a lot of the current efforts that we have underway. So mitigation, for example, again, it's primarily looking at how we can reduce emissions and other negative environmental consequences, whether that's trying to divert material or products in the land going to the landfill, water quality and water consumption is another example of the mitigation work that we have at play right now. And then thinking about the future. So again, I've talked about this adaptation and resilience piece. That's what a climate action resilience plan does. It creates a plan for the institution or the organization to lower the risks, right? Or at least identify the risks and understand what they are so that you can craft and create solutions that ensure continuity. So we had several workshops where we gathered a focus team of people from the organization, cross-functional representation. We had a series of workshops, envisioning sessions, and on the back end, what we came up with was kind of this short list of strategic directions of where we need to go through that climate action resilience plan. And these were the things that really bubbled to the top as areas and topics that we need to address. So climate education, resilient supply chains. As I mentioned, if we have more severe storms and flooding, like we need to ensure that the medical devices and supplies that we need to carry out our mission are not hindered, and that the supply chains both have redundancy and resiliency kind of built into it so that we don't see shortages when it comes to patient care. Infrastructure redundancy, that could mean more having more than one line of like chilled water going to a building, for example, in case we have an issue. Like we have more than one way to get chilled water into the building. Community and climate engagement, again, as an anchor institution, it's an obligation of ours to make sure that we are engaging with the community and that they understand, what our role is as far as being leaders in this space and helping uh, to mitigate the effects of climate change and to being good stewards of our resources and of the environment. Climate prepared buildings and planning, I mentioned that. Again, just thinking about the future and what we expect to see from weather patterns and changing climate to ensure that our buildings are hardened against those effects. And temperature adaptation and heat response, whether that's having uh, cooling spaces in our buildings. As we see more and more extreme heat events, we can bring people in, make sure they cool down and that they're not susceptible to the worst of the worst as we see the climate change in our region going forward. And again, these are flexible space and people, climate ready technologies, a few things that came to mind that came out of that workshop. Okay, so how do we operationalize sustainability efforts on campus? We have focus teams that are aligned with our sustainability goals. We have leaders for each of these focus teams, and they're subject matter experts or folks who at least know how to mobilize the resources that we need to get us closer to those campus goals. Right. So here's a quick breakdown. We have focus team for transportation, for net zero, for water, for waste, and for engagement. And if you've never seen this graphic before, I just threw it in here because I think it's a good one and it's important for people to understand the different scopes of emissions. Again, scope 1 are your direct emissions. Scope 2 are the emissions related to what you buy, essentially electricity or steam. And then scope 3, that's 70-80% is your supply chain. So everything upstream and downstream that is in your supply chain. The next few slides I'm going to go through are really just looking at some of the more current work that each of the focus teams are working on right now. So you get a sense of what we're doing on campus as it relates to the different focus teams. So for the scope 1 and 2 emissions, this is continuous improvement. It's energy efficiency. It's measuring our projected growth to make sure that we're designing and constructing buildings that are responsible or sophisticated and not contributing to it. So using the least amount of energy, consuming the least amount of water as possible, things like that. Again, trying to integrate more clean energy, partnering with our utility provider, our electricity provider, OPPD, financial strategies. So, leveraging the IRA funds if they're still available moving forward, things like that are what's in scope for the 1 and 2 or for our emissions reduction focus team. If you look here real quick, this is our scope 1 and 2 breakdown. Not all the data is in there, but you can see that the trend line is headed in the right direction. We are reducing over time. The COVID years were a little bit challenging. Things were different, but we're headed in the right direction and in the right trajectory. Not all the data is in here for this year, for fiscal year 25. but you can see that we're moving down, which is the right direction. Okay, scope three. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that under the HHS Climate Pledge, one of the commitments is to have a scope three inventory done by the end of calendar year 24, and we're on target to have that done. So we have the UNMC data entered. I'm working on getting the Nebraska Med spend data in there. Some other things that are at play right now is a sustainable procurement guidance or policy. Like we're thinking about how we can be more responsible in the way we procure and purchase supplies and equipment that again do not contribute to the climate challenge. So whether that's like looking at life cycle analysis of products or having some kind of lens or framework through which we think about procurement is one of the things that I hope to develop and produce over the next year. And then leveraging our group purchase order spend management tool. So we buy a lot of stuff and consume a lot of stuff. We have this GPO that we work with. They have several folks on staff who are sustainability experts. So working with them to make sure that we find alignment is also one strategy for addressing scope three emissions. And again, here's a graph of the scope three emissions. It's in orange. This is just the UNMC data. So Nebraska Med data is not in there right now. But you can see how it fluctuates. And we just need to get this baseline so that we can then develop a carbon reduction plan as it pertains to scope three. Transportation, again, I talked about the Travel Smart program as kind of being the flagship program. The idea here is that we are providing our colleagues, students, and staff with options other than just driving to campus. Right, we have EV charging on campus. We have this campus shuttle pilot that's running right now, but we're looking at ways to improve this over time. And there's different things that we know are out there. This particular focus team just kind of transitioned over to a new leader, and so we're getting that individual up to speed and oriented to kind of lead this work moving forward. Net zero waste, again, 90% diversion rate by 2030. So some of the things we've done in the last quarter are integrating this single stream recycling on main campus. So now we can put both plastics, metals, and cardboard in one stream. That helps simplify things for folks. And we think it will help increase the diversion rate as well. We're looking at food waste in retail spaces and patient service spaces, trying to get a handle and a baseline on what that looks like so that we can address that, hopefully with a composting program that we operationalize in the future. Those are just a few examples. And again, I'm just scratching the surface here. For water, we recently had a study done that really took a deep dive on how water is consumed on campus. You can see this chart here. A lot of the water on campus is actually being consumed at the cooling tower, but there's opportunities with the plumbing fixtures and irrigation processes that we have in place to be more efficient with that. And we're, again, through that focus team, exploring what those solutions may look like. Engagement's really important because you need robust engagement to have folks really thinking about how to get involved and how to develop solutions across the board, across all of the sustainability goals that we have on campus right now. So some of the things that we've done, I would say in the last 6 months or year, is stand up this Green Lab program. This has been a really good way to engage with our research community on campus. We're wrapping up that pilot actually next week, and we'll do some analysis on it, on the impact of it. We have Higher Ed Sustainability Month. This is in October. So again, in addition to our Earth Month activities, we do this again essentially in October. And we just wrapped that up. We had a whole list of events and opportunities for people to get involved. I mentioned the sustainability engagement survey. And then one of the more important things that we've done this year is shift that Live Green Ambassador, that volunteer network I mentioned earlier in the presentation, to a formalized employee resource group. So through that process, they get more resources at their disposal, and that will help increase engagement on campus, is the thinking. I mentioned these labs, the Green Lab program. Again, next few slides are really just going to look at some of the impacts here. So compared to office spaces, laboratories and research spaces use 10 times more energy. So, that might be a surprising statistic to some folks. 4 times more water. They produce a lot of plastic waste. Just think about if you've ever spent any time in a lab, all the procedures and protocols require some pretty stringent steps, and a lot of that requires a lot of plastic, right? And not all of it is recyclable, and not all of it gets diverted. So, trying to raise awareness and bring that to the light in the research spaces, especially, was one of the main pillars of this particular program. And here's the mission of the Green Labs. I mentioned that it runs until November 30th. And this is in alignment with some NU system sustainability goals, which I didn't mention here. But everything that we design and execute on campus tries to cascade down from the NU system level to the campus level to the department level. That alignment is really important for ensuring success on efforts and initiatives. And I think this is my last, or I got a few more slides. One other way to engage the student population is through this planetary health report card. So this was the first time that we had participated in this particular reporting framework. We came in 15th out of 53 in the United States. So I was very, very proud of our ranking there and the work that the students did. It's really a gap analysis to see, through these 5 different dimensions, what we're doing well and what we need to improve in. And so we're using this in a strategic way to figure out how and what programming is going to look like to try and improve our score in those individual domains. Okay, key takeaways. The healthcare's climate impact is real, right? As an industry and a sector, we do contribute to it. We have a moral responsibility to also try and mitigate the worst of those impacts. And that means mitigation, adaptation, resilience planning, like all that stuff is packaged into that as well. And you have to have this stuff for long-term success of a program. Like those are the key takeaways from the presentation. I think I'm right on time. Hopefully, we'll have a few minutes for questions, but I'll turn back to you, Michael.
Yeah, great. So we do have a few questions. I think we can probably get to about 2 of them. First one is, how are you planning, or will you be planning, resilience within the broader community, i.e. Omaha, keeping Omaha in mind? For example, are you working with city planner, mayor's office, county board, anything like that?
Yeah, great question. I did not touch on that, but yes, we are. So I was on one of the committees to the Climate Action Resilience Plan. I think it was the planning team, right? So I've been in that process early on, and one of the main, I'd say, thrusts of our own Climate Action Resilience Plan is to figure out how we couch into that or integrate into the larger Omaha Climate Action and Resilience Plan to both support and complement it, right? Kind of have a bi-directional relationship, if you will. And we're definitely thinking about that. And that's one way that we stay connected to, I'd say, the municipal level of planning when it comes to climate action.
And then, Don, you've asked a bunch of questions. I'm going to pick one. And then I would suggest maybe just sending the rest of them over to Jerrod. So the one I've picked is, there are solar panels on some of your buildings. Will new buildings have more solar added as a matter of practice, since it looks like you keep adding more load?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I can say is that we are making our buildings solar ready, PV ready, where it makes sense, right? That the funding and even the ROI on solar is pretty hard in our market, to be honest with you. It's different on the coasts in the middle of the country. That looks very different. And so the what we're doing right now is making those PV ready. And I mentioned the IRA funds. There's some uncertainty about where that's going to head with the incoming administration. But the way we've been thinking about that is trying to leverage opportunities like that to then place solar modules on roofs and buildings that are oriented correctly in the future. Because not every building is oriented in the best way to take advantage of solar PV.
Yeah, I understand that one. All right, Jerrod, thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and say thank you to Jerrod. And we got a couple comments. One being thank you for all of what you've done by leading our health center. So much appreciated on that. And thanks everybody for attending. We've got about a 9-minute break here. I'm going to go ahead and do some testing with our next speakers, and then we will officially start back up at the top of the hour at noon.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jerrod.